We are talking with Dr. James Partington today, who is with Behavior Analysts, Inc. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Whoa, I'm a behavior analyst. That's where I start. My background is in behavior analysis right from the start. When I went to college back in the late 60s, early 70s, I took a course in psychology, and it was a course in behavior analysis. And after that first course, I knew that this is what I was going to do the rest of my life.
Bitten by the bug.
It was perfectly clear. This all made sense. I'd taken psychology courses in high school, and there were a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and quite frankly, it wasn't all that interesting. But when I understood about the relationships of the environment and its effect upon behavior, and that people could systematically make environmental manipulations that would change the probability of a behavior, it just became so logical to me that this is something that could be used under many different conditions to help a lot of different people with problems that they're having. There had been a start in the field of trying to apply the principles of behavior to a lot of different human conditions, and luckily I just happened to start right as that was kind of really taking off. And so I fell in love with it, and soon I found myself working with children with developmental disabilities, and that was in 1972 I began. And I learned right away when I walked into the classroom. I was young and naive. I'd worked with adults at a psychiatric hospital on a locked ward. I had run my experiments with rats and pigeons, and now here I am. I'm walking into a school, and the teacher there at the time, her name was Betty Fry, it's now Betty Fry Williams, said, "Here's your two children, Jenny and Rhonda." And these two little girls were lying on the floor. And so I said, "Okay, well, what would you like me to do?" And she said, "Establish yourself as a conditioned reinforcer." And being a behavior analyst, I knew exactly what she meant. And that means pair myself with the delivery of good things for these children, such that the children want to do things for me, such that my behavior serves as a reinforcer for behaviors that I want from them. And so you play with the child, you get them to do things, you get them to smile and laugh and enjoy your company, such that when you come in and ask them to start doing something, your behavior, you're getting excited with them, serves as a reinforcer for their behavior. And so I learned right away the value of establishing yourself as a conditioned reinforcer, becoming important, and I realized that I was very good at getting kids to do the things that I wanted them to do and to teach the skills. And as a result of that, I soon was involved in a classroom where I was in charge of about a dozen children and developing their programs. And again, I went on to become a consultant in the local school system for a while. Then I went on and got my doctorate and started teaching people about teaching methods, behavior analytic teaching methods. Taught at several universities along the way. I was on the child clinical faculty at West Virginia University. And then I ended up going to California, working for a regional center system, whereby I was the educational consultant for a while and also the behavioral consultant for a couple of years after that, trying to establish relationships with the schools to provide effective education for children with disabilities. I was also sending consultants into the homes of parents who were having disruptive behaviors. The children were having the disruptive behaviors, and the parents needed to learn how to deal with that. It was sent at first under the guise of trying to keep the children from being placed out of home because their behavior is so disruptive to the family. But then later I started realizing that there were a lot of these young children that were coming along who had signs that they were going to have problems later on. Clear indications were the lack of language development. You had children who clearly weren't asking for things, they weren't following directions, they weren't able to talk about things, they didn't have ways of accessing reinforcers like typical children did. And hence when you see this with young children, you know that when they get older, if they still don't have those language skills, they're going to have bigger problems because they're going to have less that they're able to control in their environment through appropriate means. And so I started sending people into the families' homes of younger children. I got the agency to approve the kind of, if you will, early intervention at the time. That was before early intervention was hot. But what happened was I started realizing that I was having more fun with the families and working with them than I was being an administrator. So I had to get away from that position and actually started providing the services again. What ended up happening was, now that I'm working with the families directly and I'm teaching parents how to teach language skills to their children. Again, I'm a behavior analyst, I'm not a speech and language therapist, never claimed to be, and I'm not. But the area that I work in is behavior, and language is behavior. And so what was happening was I was teaching the parents how to be good teachers, and then they'd send their children off to school, and oftentimes I was teaching at the university there too. I was teaching at St. Mary's College in Moraga at the time. And what was interesting was I'd find that many of the teachers weren't acquiring the skills they needed to work with children, especially children with autism. You know, the educational programs at the university just aren't strong enough for teaching how to work with children who are difficult to motivate, who are having severe difficulties in acquiring language and social interaction skills. And so most of the people didn't have enough training before they were put in a classroom. So here they are in a classroom with a number of children, and at the time there was children with what they called heterogeneous grouping. And so you had kids of all different types of disabilities in the same classroom. You might have one hyperactive child that was running out the door. You had another child that wouldn't follow any directions whatsoever. You might have another child that was, bouncing on a ball somewhere in the corner. You had to keep hauling him back to try to get him to do something. And these poor teachers were often not trained sufficiently in terms of what to do, or if they were trained in what to do, they weren't given the resources to work with these children.
Right.
So I started seeing that, and I have another scenario I'd like to describe to you, and that is you'd walk into a classroom, and here's a teacher, and what do they do with children in special education? Well, they've got to have their morning circle time. And so now you come in, and I'm called in as a consultant to help out with a little boy, and the problem is he won't stay seated during the morning circle time. He gets up and he keeps leaving. So they've hired another instructional assistant to sit behind him and say, "Attaboy, Johnny, you're sitting there very nicely," reinforce him with praise to try to keep him there. And then I'd come in, because it wasn't working, I'd come in and I'd start watching. They're talking about the weather, they're talking about the days of the week and who arrived and what they were going to do after lunch. And then I'd start asking some questions about the boy. Let's just call him Johnny, okay? So Johnny's got a problem. He's jumping up and down, and the therapist, the instructional assistant would wait for him, praise him, and as soon as he'd jump up, they'd grab him, bring him back down. And then he'd grab him, bring him back down. Or maybe reach out, pull Susie's hair, get the hands back. And, "Attaboy, Johnny, you're sitting there nicely." And then I start asking, well, what language skills does Johnny have? And it turns out that Johnny couldn't even perhaps label even his backpack or his shoes or know what a school bus is, let alone what the temperature is like and what you're going to do after lunch. So you've got a child who's sitting there in a situation for 15, 20 minutes when there's really no way for him to learn or participate in that. He has no way of gaining access to reinforcers. So he does what we would do. If we were put in a class where we didn't have the slightest idea what was going on, we'd probably better leave, go do something else. And so basically what happened in those situations was I started saying, well, you're addressing the wrong problem. What Johnny needs is to learn language skills such that he can access reinforcers, rather than sit there and try to learn something that's impossible for him to learn under these conditions. So anyhow, that being the case, I saw enough of this going on, and I tried to make changes as a consultant from outside, and I realized it was hopeless. It wasn't going to happen. So in 1991, I decided that I was going to open up a school. It's called Starr School. It stands for Strategic Teaching and Reinforcement Systems, and it's designed to provide 1 to 2 instruction for children with severe language delays. Well, of course, with that, we started the school. We keep it small. We only have 10 children now. We want it small because we want to help children. We want to provide intensive intervention for children. And so when we started up the school, we got a number of kids who had some behavior problems, of course, because those were the ones that the districts were often willing to send to us because they were having problems and it kind of solved some of their problems. But we developed a lot of our language training techniques and refined a lot of them in the process. And while we were doing that, we started taking a look at the procedures, the curriculum. What do you teach a child with severe language delays? Well, I started going to the schools asking their curriculum specialists, what's your curriculum? Well, you'd get the same story. Oh, well, we individualize it for everybody as we have to for at that time was Public Law 94-142, free and appropriate education, individualized programming. I said, but where's your curriculum? And they said, well, we use a functional skills curriculum, or we use a language-based curriculum. And I said, yeah, but can I see it? And what you'd find is oftentimes it was a phantom curriculum. There really wasn't a curriculum. There is for regular education, because it's laid out by state mandates, but for special education, there's often not a curriculum. So we started taking a look at all the different types of skills that children needed to learn. And in working with children, you start finding deficit areas, and as a result, we started compiling those, and that's kind of how we ended up with the ABLES, the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills. We started by looking at all the different, what we call verbal operants, in terms of what are some of the critical skills there, but we also extended it way beyond that, too. We took a look at social interaction skills, visual performance type of skills, imitation skills, taking a look at group learning, and so on, play skills, generalization of those responses. And as a result, we created the ABLES, the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills, and from there we were able to get a better handle on what a child actually needed to work on.